I am finishing up the series. It's a 4-week series that we've been looking at. I told Zach earlier, man, it was killer what he did to start us off on this. Now, I'm having to follow, no pun intended, from a distance online and listen to this. But, man, setting the stage so clearly. I loved even just a couple of little statements that he made, just a couple of things that what is following all about. And I'll be up on the screen just a second. But do you remember when he said that if you, this is a paraphrase, if you have it all together, in some ways it disqualifies you from being a follower. I loved that. I went, ooh, good. Because I don't have it even remotely close together. Sometimes you can try to fake it, but even in our faking, we still blow that at it. So it was so good to hear the people that Jesus hangs out with. It was really good. He said this, ultimately, following is an invitation to a relationship. When Jesus says, follow me, it's all about relating to him. We get caught up oftentimes into thinking that follow me means follow after my way of living. He does imply that, but we cannot follow in his way of living without walking alongside of him. In other words, I cannot do what Jesus does without Jesus. If you remove Jesus from the equation of Christianity, you have no Christianity. It's not like any other religion that's been started where you have a founder who dies, he leaves the scene, his influence remains on that organization or that religion over time, but he's gone. That's not it. Jesus is Christianity. And when he says, follow me, he doesn't just say, do what I do. He is implying that. But what he's saying is, walk along with me. And he's not saying it as in some other cultures where you would have someone who would walk up here and then someone else would be walking far behind. He's saying, walk with me. Max Lucado tells a great story of his time he was out with his daughter. I think she was 4 or 5 at the time, and as they began to walk through the neighborhood, they went on a path that she was unfamiliar with, and they got outside of the area that she was aware of. And he thought for a moment, I wonder if this is frightening for her. She was busy chatting away, telling Dad about her day and what was going on. And he finally said, honey, do you know where we are? She looked around. No, I don't. Do you know how to get back home? No, I don't. Honey, I'm sorry. Does that frighten you? No, Daddy. I don't have to know the way. You do. That's us. That's us just walking alongside, holding our hand, if you will, father and child, just walking. Where do we go? I don't know. Because the most important thing is who we're with. Follow me equals relationship. The other thing that we talked about in here, forgive me for getting my notes, is that Matt talked about this faith that was in a boat. I love just the emphasis upon, we oftentimes tend to take our focus towards that which is in the boat or not in the boat, the things, rather than focusing on who is in the boat. And he talked about a faith that overwhelms our fear. Great wording. I'm sure he borrowed that from somebody because he's not smart enough to think of that. There's a faith that overwhelms our fear. You do realize, don't you, that there is no such thing as faith without fear. We've said it before. Faith and doubt are not mutually exclusive. The opposite of faith is fear. The opposite of faith is not doubt. When we walk through this journey, and you pick out any illustration you want, but when we step that foot up and then we're going to place our weight down here, we are by definition trusting that this is going to hold us. There's a chance it might not. See, the faith when we are with Jesus allows us to step forward in spite of our fear. It doesn't remove all fear. It helps us to move forward in spite of fear. It overwhelms our fear. Faith takes over. Matt asked a great question. I think it was just last week, I think. But when he wrote that, I had to push pause on my little iPad as I was watching the sermon. He said, are we really following Jesus, or have we invited him to follow us? Am I committed, in the best sense of the word, to just simply following him as I walk with him wherever he chooses to go, whenever he chooses to go, however he chooses to go? Or am I so busy trying to live out the map that I have, the roadmap that I've got developed for my family, for my future, for my career, for my friendships, all that. And I'm just asking the Lord if he would just come on board, just jump on board with me and just bless the effort. Is it really a reckless abandon to my plan? Is it really a no to what I want and a yes to what you want? Now, according to the scriptures, by the way, we have to ask that question every day, because following him is a daily deal. All of this leads us to the fact that our God really is a personal God. Personal meaning not just that he deals with whole groups of people, Israel, the church. It's not just that he deals with all of us, which he does, but it's also that somehow or another, even in the midst of that, he's a very personal God. I can't explain this, but there are times in which I deal with all of my children, and there are many of them. But then there's also those sweet times that I get, in which I just get to hang out with one of them. I can't do both at the same time. I'm finite. I don't know how God does this, but right now, in a very real sense, it's not just that his presence is here this morning because 2 or 3 are gathered together in his name. It's that he really is sitting beside you. I don't get that. He really is able to carry on conversations with all of us at the same time. He can speak through someone even like me, and yet he can also whisper in your ear so that you hear something specific this morning that you need. I don't know. That's just a God thing. He just pulls out the God card and he's able to do that. He's a personal God. So here's what we're going to talk about this morning. When Jesus invites us to follow him, and he invites us to this day after day after day. Remember, he says, take up your cross daily and follow me, is what he says in Luke chapter 9. When we're doing this, one of the things that we should absolutely expect is that along the way, we are going to fail. So, expect failure. But don't ever give up. Don't ever quit. Don't ever stop. You are going to stumble in this, folks. It is just a matter of time, and likely you will stumble and fall a couple of times in a day. What are you thinking right now? Are you thinking that I'm talking about you're going to stumble and fall into some type of sin? That's not what I'm referring to. What I'm referring to is you're going to stumble and fall in staying with him. There's going to be times in which you're going to want to stop and let him go and leave him. That's what I'm referring to. Expect failure. Expect this desire in your heart that will want to do that, but please don't quit. Why do people quit most of the time? Why is it that we cease meeting with him? Why do we quit sometimes just to not read the Bible? But reading the Bible is not the only way that we walk with God. Please don't hear me saying that. I don't want to limit it to that, but it is one of the ways that we need to hear from him. In its simplest form, the Bible is God speaking to us. So why do we sometimes stop reading? Why do we sometimes stop praying? Why do we sometimes just give up on this relationship? There's a lot of reasons we could give, but if I could boil it into this two words, but if I could boil it into this one thought, it would be this: because we have unmet expectations or unrealistic expectations. Not unrealistic expectations in that we think that, or that God can't do everything, not that. It's that he doesn't do oftentimes what we really long for him to do. And oftentimes that involves a great deal of pain. And so we give up on God because the relationship with him gets really hard. I don't need to illustrate this, but I think you'll get this. This is what happens oftentimes with immature relationships, be it a friendship or be it a romantic relationship. We give up on that relationship because it gets hard. Right in those early stages of dating when everything is great and grand and you're just so in love. And then the other person does something, I don't mean something that's just irritating. I mean something that wounds you. Now you got a choice to make. Am I going to press on? Are we going to work through this, or are we going to permanently just go our separate ways? And this is hard. It is hard to do this in any relationship. Father, son, brother to sister, husband to wife, friend to friend, follower to Jesus. It's hard. One of the reasons that we give up is because we don't really understand what it means to follow. We were married in 1995, and pretty early on we learned that we could not have children. I've shared this with you before, but it didn't take us long to go the route of adoption. And so after many failures in children coming into our home, we embraced the fact that we would not get pregnant. And finally, two little boys, twin boys, came into our home in 2003, and it was beyond rejoicing in our home. 2 years later, in 2005, we adopted another boy who was born in Atlanta. 13 months later, we adopted another boy who was born in Orlando. And then a year and a half later, we made preparations as we were getting ready to head off to Ethiopia to go adopt two other boys. They are 4 months apart in age, and they would be right at a year old when we would pick them up. And some of the most amount of fun that we had, that we look back on our journey, is we would get these videos of these two little kids. And so all of our family would get around, we'd gather, and we'd pray. And Emerson was too young. He was the youngest at that point. He was too young to really know what was going on, but the rest of us prayed for these little boys, Sawyer and Wyatt, who we would pray for. And it was a blast. That was in May of 2009 that we would go there. In December of 2008, my wife got really ill. And you've heard me talk about it. She's a machine. She keeps going, and whatever it is that she needs to do, she's so disciplined. So when she went down for a couple of days, I went, this is serious. This woman's really sick, and it just wouldn't go away. It kept lingering. Now, we always knew that there was the potential of her body having some effects from the anorexia early in her life that she had battled with. We knew that there was potential long-term damage to that, and so that was in our back of our minds. Is there something more serious going on? We went to the doctor, and the doctor said, there's something here, but I can't tell you what it is. I can't tell you why. I don't know. So we went to a second doctor, and that doctor said much of the same thing. Hey, there's something clearly going on with you, but I don't know what it is. And we finally got the recommendation of a third doctor to go to. It's a brilliant, brilliant woman there in one of the suburbs in Atlanta. And she said, come on in. She's known for really getting after it in diagnosis. And so we went to her, and she listened to the story. She said, hey, I think I've got a pretty good idea about what this is. If it's not this, we're going to find out. We're going to test everything, but I think I've got a pretty good idea. And so she tested. She came back into the room. She shared it with Judith. She said, it's exactly what I thought it was. And so Judith called me on the way home from that doctor's appointment. She said, David, I don't know how to tell you this, but I'm pregnant. I'm sorry, you're what? And the news that we had, early on was that we would never, ever, ever, ever be able to get pregnant. We were at peace with that. So she said, pregnant. And my response after your what was, and I just started giggling. It didn't alter our plans at all to go to Ethiopia. What's the difference between 6 or 7 children? It's the only difference is the difference between a Suburban and a 12-passenger van. That's about all there is. So we waited till the 14-week mark to share this with anyone. And Matt and Tracy was one of those first phone calls that we got a chance to make, and just a blast. At the 18-week mark, curiosity got the best of us. So we went in for the ultrasound, and I wanted to be surprised. I wanted to be that dad from years ago that was actually out in the waiting room, but my wife said that's not an option at all. So at the 18-week mark, she does the ultrasound. She says, do you want to know? And I look over at Judith, and I said, do you want to know? She said, I do. So I said, okay, tell us. And she said, it's a little girl. So a little caboose of a female along with this train of boys, we thought this is going to be fun. And the main thing for me that I thought was, you know how easy now this makes my job as a dad to protect my daughter? Because I long for the day when a boy comes over to the house and says, go get them, boys. That's good. Began to think of all kind of things, what this would look like. But the two thoughts that were driving the most in my mind was, I cannot wait to watch this little girl grow up and look and sound and talk and act and be really just like her mom. I'm married to a godly woman, a deeply flawed woman, but she is godly to the core. And the thought of having a little mini Judith is exciting. The other thought I had was being a pastor, of actually that moment when the doors come open and then walking her arm and arm down the aisle, and I'm there until I get some person, it could be a youth pastor, I don't know who it would be, that she would have a relationship with. The pastor would start the service and say, who gives this woman to be married to this man? And I would say, I do. Her mother and I do. And then we would trade places. I would go up and continue on with the rest of the service and get that joy. It was a week and a half after the ultrasound that I got a phone call while I was at lunch, and Judith said, David, something is wrong. My stomach hurts so bad. Will you meet me at the doctor's office? And so I met her at the doctor's office, and he confirmed our worst fears, and we had lost our girl. I prayed right there on the spot in the doctor's office and was saying, Lord, I don't understand, but we trust you. In essence, quoted a passage of Scripture. And then that night we had to go into the hospital so that we could deliver the next morning. We were too far along, and so we would actually have to go through the birthing process. So on Thursday, we gave birth, and it was every bit as horrific and as beautiful as you would imagine it would be. And the doctor was so kind and gracious. He gave us a moment in which we could just hold her small, tiny little body. And we held, and we cried, and we prayed, and I said, from dust we have come, and from dust we shall return. So into your hands, Lord, we commit her spirit. We stayed in the hospital on Thursday night just for a few other complications that had taken place. And so on Friday we went home. On Saturday morning, the next day, I boarded the plane to go to Ethiopia. Halfway between Washington Dulles Airport and Rome, Italy, where we were getting more fuel, it went dark and black. And the only thing I know to describe it is it was just a spiritual fog like I have never been in my life. And I just simply could not think clearly about what is right, what is wrong, what is true, what is untrue. I was just flooded and I couldn't see. Halfway in between that week, because it was from May 2nd to May 9 of 2009, I was there to spend time with the boys, and the paperwork that had to go through. There was a meeting we had to have before we could come home. And so halfway between, when I realized that I'm just basically weeping most every day, and on every hour, I'm doing nobody any good. I'm not bonding with these kids, so I did what men can do sometimes, and that's just compartmentalize. I just shoved it to the side and said, I'm not going to think about it or pray anymore. And so that was the last prayer that I prayed. When we got home, the flight, going up the escalator at Huntersville International, I had this vision of my wife, and it finally came flooding back, everything that I had shoved to the side so effectively. And so Judith is there waiting, and she's crying. And I have one child in my arms, and my mother-in-law has the other child in hers. And I know that Judith is crying on this side of her face, is crying over joy of these two precious souls now into our home that we get the joy of rearing. And on this side, I knew that there were tears of pain over a daughter that we would never be able to know. And just a couple of days back home, I began to question, what if God is not the God who I've talked about and preached about and counseled about and prayed about? What if he really is something other, and he's sinister and he's dark and he's deceiving? What if that's him? And the pain set in so deep at that point that I could not see truth. And so what I began to do is say, well, obviously I've got to get out of ministry. And so I began to think of ways to get out of ministry. And the more I thought, it wasn't just out of ministry that I wanted out of the faith completely. I didn't want to serve that kind of a God if that's who he is. And so I began my way in Genesis and made my way all the way through Malachi, and I took my seminary training in there, and I began to think, well, maybe it wasn't the Red Sea, it was really a reed sea, and maybe it wasn't really a sun that stopped out there. Maybe that was something the author was trying to say, and maybe it wasn't really a giant fish that swallowed this dude, and maybe this is all an allegory and this is not believable. And I did a pretty good job of excusing everything away until I got to Jesus. And I couldn't unbelieve. He is who he said he is. He did what he said he would do. He did leave his throne above. He came down to earth. He put on skin. He became one of us. He lived the life that Adam could not live, nor any other person could have ever lived. He did it perfectly in thought, word, and deed, and then he died a pain and cruel death on a cross. And the wrath of God came upon him at that moment and removes the wrath from all who come to him in faith. And he was literally dead on Friday, and then he was in the tomb on Saturday, and on Sunday morning, Jesus came back to life, and he rolled the tomb away, and he walked out, and he exists this moment. I couldn't unbelieve. So now what I want to do is to walk with God like this. You keep your distance, and I'll keep mine. The invitation is to follow. I just wanted him to go. I didn't pray until about a month and a half later, and then I finally began to pray again because doggone it, it's true. And since my church won't let me out of ministry, I was open and honest with them, and they said, no, we want to love you, we want to support you, we want to come around you, we want to give you some time. So doggone it, I guess I'll pray for other things, but I would not pray about Bradford, her name. Until July. On my way home from a conference, and I just sensed the Lord pressing in, saying, come to me and pray about your daughter. And so I began praying while in my truck, and overwhelmed with emotion, I had to make my way off the road and just wept like a baby. And I told God out loud, this is the last time we'll ever talk about this. November comes around, and I have to teach a certain Bible study for juniors and seniors in high school. It's a leadership course. It's how do you pray for and how do you minister to those in your school. And the students get to choose the book, and so the students chose the book of Habakkuk. And I said, this would be great. These students will learn some things about Habakkuk. And then I read the first line. Habakkuk. Chapter 1. This is the oracle that Habakkuk the prophet saw. O Lord, how long shall I cry for help and you will not hear? Or cry to you violence and you will not save? Why do you make me see iniquity, and why do you idly look at wrong? Destruction and violence are before me. Strife and contention arise. So the law is paralyzed and justice never goes forth. For the wicked surround the righteous, so justice goes forth perverted. See, what's happening is that Habakkuk is a prophet that was called by God to come and to minister. But this is what makes Habakkuk different than any other prophet. Nowhere is it recorded that Habakkuk ever says anything to anyone. See, all the other prophets were ones that God would give words to, and then he would say, here is what the Lord has said. But we don't have a record of Habakkuk talking to jack squat. The dialogue that's taking place between the prophet and the Lord. And see, when he was a child, he watched this great revival take place in the southern kingdom. So 639 is when he is when Habakkuk is a child. He's watching Josiah, who is the king, and they are following God. They are coming after the Lord once again. They're saying no to the worthless idols, and he sees this happening. And then in 609, when he dies, the next king comes in, and he is evil, and he abandons the ways of the Lord, and then now they're doing all kinds of injustice. I won't walk you through some of the things that they were doing, but trust me on this. It was inhumane. It was unbelievable. And Habakkuk is looking at the landscape, and he's saying, God, how long are you going to look at this? How long are you going to let this happen? And so he's talking about injustices. In essence, though, here's what he's saying. God, where are you? See, maybe you look at things like Hitler or Stalin or Lenin. When you look at things throughout history, and you look at present day or modern day human trafficking, maybe you look at things like your father who walked away from you. Maybe you look at things that you know the Lord doesn't desire this, and yet he puts up with it. In some ways, it even seems like he is just intentionally shoving it right in your face. And you want to say, God, where are you in this? I don't know. Maybe you too had an unexplained pregnancy. And a death of that child. I don't know what you had. But it took me all of 10 seconds to identify what the prophet's saying. God, I don't get you. Verse 5, the Lord answers, look among the nations and see. Wonder and be astounded, for I am doing a work in your days that you would not believe, even if you were told. For behold, I am raising up the Chaldeans, that bitter and hasty nation, who march through the breadth of the earth to seize dwellings not their own. They are dreaded and fearsome. Their justice and dignity goes forth from themselves. And I won't finish it, but he goes on and on to talk about how ruthless they are, how arrogant they are, how proud they are. And so the Lord answers the question of where are you by saying this, just look outward. I'm going to raise up a people who do not know me, who do not follow me, who do not love me, who do not worship or adore me. I'm going to raise them up to bring about justice on my people who are committing this injustice. You're going to do what? What kind of an answer is that? Pick up with me in verse 12. Are you not from everlasting? Habakkuk is talking now. O Lord, my God, my Holy One, we shall not die. Lord, you have ordained them as judgment, and you, O rock, have established them for reproof. You who are of pure eyes than to see evil and cannot look at wrong. Why do you idly look at traitors and remain silent when the wicked swallows up the man more righteous than he? What he's saying is this: why do you, how can you possibly bring about somebody else that is worse off than we are in order to deal with us? It just doesn't make sense. Now, skip down and focus in on the first part of chapter 2. He complains to God a little bit more, but look at what he says. I will take my stand at my watchpost and station myself on the tower and look out to see what he will say to me and what I will answer concerning my complaint. In essence, what the prophet does is he takes a stand on what's called a watchpost. This watchpost would be a place where the folks would look out around. They would find out where the messenger is coming to deliver a message, or an enemy, or whatever it may be. They would scan, they would stare, they would gaze and wait for the messenger. And he says, I'm going to place myself right here, and I'm going to wait for you to answer me. Now, this is not a guy who's waiting patiently. This is an aggressive, he is saying, God, you owe me. You owe me an answer for what it is that you have done. And I found myself right there with the prophet. We didn't ask to get pregnant. We were at peace with it never happening. We weren't pursuing it. You just all of a sudden bring about a miraculous pregnancy, knowing that there's likely nothing else in life that would bring us this level of joy. And yet with the skill of a surgeon, you cut so deep into our hearts and you wounded us in a way that you could have never wounded us. You owe me an answer for why you did this. And here's what I sensed from the Lord. No, I don't. I sensed him firmly but gently saying, I don't owe you anything. We won't read it, but in chapter 2, what happens is, chapter 1 is a dialogue between the prophet and God. Chapter 2 is a monologue from God. And basically what God says is this: I am going to deal with them. But focus in with me real quick on one verse. It is verse 4 of chapter 2. Behold, his soul is puffed up. It is not upright within him, but the righteous shall live by his faith. God first told him to look outward, and you'll see the second thing he tells him to do in response to the second question is this: look inward. And I want you to ask yourself the question. This is God talking to Habakkuk. I want you to ask yourself, where is your faith? The righteous will live by his faith. There's actually a good argument that can be made for it. It probably should be rendered, the righteous will live by his faithfulness. Do you think that your faith is going to get you through the difficult circumstances in life? It won't. Three times Habakkuk 2:4 is quoted in the New Testament. For sure, two of them are Paul. If Paul wrote the book of Hebrews, then all three are him. But he writes it first in Romans, and it's writing in context of being justified before God. How are we made right before God? How does he make it just as if we have never sinned? He does it by faith. It is the faithfulness of Jesus, and then we apprehend it, or we grasp it, or we embrace it by faith. We cannot make ourselves right before God. Jesus has to do the work. We have to believe that Jesus is the only one who could make us that. And then we accept it as a gift by faith, meaning we trust, we apprehend, we believe because God says it's true. So practically speaking, what does it look like? It means I step out in faith and say, okay, God, I no longer have controls of my life. You have the controls. By faith, we apprehend it. The second time it's quoted is in Galatians. Paul starts out that book, you foolish Galatians. Did you think you could start out by grace and then you could achieve something later on? He gets them back to saying, even your sanctification, or the process by which we are made more and more and more into the image of Jesus, that we walk and talk and think and love like he does, that happens not by our hard work and diligence. It happens by faith. It's still Jesus' work. Jesus did the work to make us right initially. Jesus continues to do the work to make us more and more like him. The way that we apprehend it or embrace it or catch it is by faith. You know the last time it's used in the New Testament, quoted? In the book of Hebrews. It's talking about how do we persevere? How do we keep going? How do we not give up on the process? He quotes this passage. It is by faith. That's in chapter 10. Chapter 11 comes along and it tells us all these examples of what these people have done in faith. How do we keep moving forward? It is not by your faith and my faith. It is by his faithfulness. See, I don't have enough faith to keep going. I don't. What God is saying, do you have enough faith to step up beside me and just trust me? What he was saying to me is, David, you'll never have an answer. And even if I were to tell you what the answer is, you couldn't comprehend it because you're finite and I'm infinite, and you can only see with this much view, whereas I've got all of you for all time. Just come to me. We don't know how much time goes in between the end of chapter 2 and the beginning of chapter 3, but what we do know is this: it's the exact amount of time that Habakkuk needed, because chapter 3 is in essence a prayer. And so after going away and thinking and dwelling upon the faithfulness of God, Habakkuk says this. Just want to read a couple of the verses. Verse 2, O Lord, I have heard the report of you, and your work, O Lord, do I fear. In the midst of the years, revive it. In the midst of the years, make it known. In wrath, remember mercy. He starts out his prayer with the personal name of God. He doesn't start out by just calling him some title. He starts out by calling him his exact name, which means he's drawing near. He says, I know what you're going to do is you're going to bring about judgment. So God, I don't like it, but I'm at peace with it. And so in your wrath, would you just remember to have mercy upon us? Verse 16. I hear and my body trembles. My lips quiver at the sound. Rottenness enters into my bones. My legs tremble beneath me. Yet I will wait quietly for the day of trouble to come upon the people who invade us. He says, the pain is not gone. The confusion is not gone. But what I will do now, instead of taking my stand and saying, you owe me, what I will do is just wait. Because I trust you. And if I never get an answer, is what he's about to say, then I'll choose to praise you. Just listen to this. Though some fig tree should not blossom, nor fruit be on the vines, the produce of the olive oil fail, and the fields yield no food, the flocks be cut off from the fold, there be no herd in the stalls, though all of life falls apart, if there is never an answer I get, if nothing again that you ever do for me is good, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will take joy in the God of my salvation. How in the world can he make that statement? Because of the next verse. God the Lord is my strength. At this very moment, I have no more answers for why the Lord has done what he's done. And there are still moments in which the pain comes back again. It happened last week with the teacher conferences as we were walking down the hall, and then one of the kindergarten teachers who has taught multiple children of ours said this, I'm just so sad because this is the last time we'll see the McNeelys on the kindergarten hall. And then it hasn't hit me in months. And then all of a sudden, just walking past, I went, Bradford would be there next year. Now, the pain doesn't sting like it did years ago, but it's still there. And the questions are still there. But I can also tell you with sincerity, the Lord has brought me to a place legitimately. He has brought me to a place where I can say, if you choose to never satisfy this desire to be a father to a girl, yet I will rejoice in thee. Why? Because God is my strength. What other option do I have? Close with this. You may ask 50 questions of the Lord. You may ask him where he is or how can he. It may be, but ultimately what we're asking always is this: God, do you love me and will you be faithful to me? And sometimes you will hear silence from him. Because he will point the same way that he did for Habakkuk. He will point down to an old rugged cross. When we ask, do you love me? He'll just say, look. Is there any more he can say? Follow me. Heavenly Father, thank you. Thank you that you are the God of Jacob and Abraham, of Isaac, that you are the God of old who is the same yesterday and today and forever. You do not change, and you have told us that you will never leave us nor forsake us. So Lord, I would pray the same thing that the man, whoever he was, in the Gospels prayed. We do believe that, but God, help us overcome our unbelief. We do trust you, but not fully. And so, God, meet us there. Help us there. God, in our failure to walk alongside of you, thank you that you have promised you will bring us back. So help us to get up. We love you. We're thankful for you. Pray all this in Jesus' name.
We hope you've enjoyed engaging in our worship experience. Everything we do at Journey is to help make a difference in people's lives. If God has been moving and working in your life, we would love to hear your story. You can share it with us at mystory@thejourneyonline.com. If you would like to invest in the ministry and mission at Journey Church, you can give online at thejourneyonline.com. Thank you for investing in the lives that are changing at Journey Church.